For those of you who may not know, I was unable to be here last week due to the road conditions where I live. And I'm so grateful to everyone who pitched in to present an alternative service on Radiant Love. Thank you all so much for doing that. My original plan for last week's service was to tell stories to illustrate each one of our newly articulated values rooted in love, and then dedicate a service for each value over the remainder of the year. Did anyone tell you about the 50 chocolate-covered strawberries I made for Valentine's Day? It's so sad. So today's service is going to be on transformation. One of my favorite stories about transformation is a true account told by Anasua Roy Chowdhury on the Moth Radio Hour, a Sunday program I often enjoy on my way home from church. It was a few weeks after the 2016 presidential election, on a cold, rainy November evening in New York City. I was sweating profusely as I lugged some heavy groceries on a subway home. Subway culture in New York is usually everyone for themselves, so I was relieved when I found a coveted spot by the back doors where I could put my bags down, lean against the wall, and relax. At the next stop, a guy holding a Bible gets on the train and launches into some hateful monologue about how many people are going to go to hell based on who they love, where they're from, or what they look like. Now, every New Yorker knows and abides by the subway code of conduct. Does anyone know the subway code of conduct? People on the train do their part by ignoring anyone who comes in and spins off a monologue. But not this guy. And the deal is, once you've said your piece of mind, then you move on to the next train and you work your way toward the front, right? That's the unspoken rule. And everyone understands this except this guy who just keeps talking. And the longer he talks, the more the atmosphere in the train changes. The city had experienced an uptick in hate crimes since the election, and shared public spaces suddenly felt less safe. Given this, I start to feel a deep need to do or say something to make this guy stop talking. And I know other people on the train do too, because one guy tells him to shut up, which of course doesn't work. There's this growing tension in my body alongside an old mantra that has helped me endure uncomfortable situations since childhood. And the mantra goes like this: it's not a big deal. Keep your feelings to yourself. Don't make a scene. It'll be over soon. But this mantra hasn't served me well in my relationships as an adult. So I feel in this moment like if I don't do something on this train, I'll be stuck in this pattern for the rest of my life. So I turn to this guy and say, if you don't stop talking, I'm going to start singing. And he completely ignores her. She's like, oh, damn, now I have to sing. So I follow through on my commitment and start singing Row, Row, Row Your Boat, because it is literally the only song I can think of in that moment. I was really hoping it would come out strong and powerful, even though it's a silly song. But I'm not a great singer, so it comes out kind of weak, sad, and weird. I get through a couple rounds on my own and then suddenly lock eyes with a kid in a stroller directly across from me who's clapping. And when I get to the merrily, 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 he starts singing. Oh, what a relief. I think, okay, it's just you and me, kid, but we got this. But then because their child is singing, the parents start singing. So now there are 4 of us singing. So this guy has to start talking louder if he wants to be heard. And then just then someone at the other end of the train takes off their headphones and starts singing too. Then another guy who's a divinity student who had asked earlier, have you even read the Bible? Starts singing. And before long, nearly every person on that train is singing, row, row, row your boat with me. And soon, it's impossible for the guy with the Bible to be heard because there are so many of us singing. And that's when I got cocky. And we started singing in rounds. Until the guy finally gives up and gets off the train. I love that story. What a brilliant, nonviolent response to a toxic, untenable, crowded situation. Joy is contagious and can transform difficult situations by dispelling hatred. In essence, joy is an act of resistance. Transformation can also occur through empathy. Mark Nepo tells us, if we strive to engage with one another in love and seek to understand another's pain and longing, that is what matters most. It is a delicate balance between the mind and the heart to hold the tension between 2 equal and opposing views. It's a lot like a teeter-totter. Justice does not prevail when one side is up while the other side is down. It is along the axis of understanding and compassion that we find peace within ourselves and yield expressions of peace to others. There's a sweet spot where both sides are lifted up. Nepo's reflection reminds me of the Facebook meme, raise your hand if you've seen it, of a Native American elder who says, what if I told you the left wing and the right wing belong to the same bird? It shifts, doesn't it? Something shifts. Everything that divides and separates denies the inherent worth and dignity of another living being and leads us to mistrust and fear one another. The imagery of the oneness of the bird humanizes the other as ourselves. It invites us to suspend the tyranny of our own defenses, right? That tyranny doesn't build bridges. And when we suspend our judgment and our tyranny of our own viewpoints, an interesting thing happens. We're able to listen more deeply, to understand another person's worldview. Their view developed just as legitimately as ours did. Such a labor of love often leads to transformation in how we perceive each other. I have a lesbian friend who went to seminary in the 80s, was an AIDS buddy, and upon graduation became a religious educator at a Catholic middle school for boys. One year, she had a student named Anthony who was very homophobic and very vocal, much like the man on the train with the Bible. No protections against hate speech or bullying in private schools existed at that time. So to help her students develop more compassion, And to dispel some of the myths about AIDS, she invited a volunteer from the AIDS Action Committee to speak to her class. The guest speaker tells the class how both he and his partner have AIDS. And he then explains how his partner's illness is more advanced and what it is like to take care of someone you love with AIDS. The boys were visibly moved by what they heard, but none more so than Anthony, who raised his hand, and my friend was thinking, oh no, what's he going to say? And asks with great concern, but who will take care of you, Richard, when you get sick? We grow in love through our relationships. Even the teacher grew in love in that moment. She acknowledged her student, gave him the freedom to speak without knowing what was going to come out. And lo and behold, something changed in him. When we hear the intimacy and pain of another's story, it's difficult to remain unchanged in our worldviews. Contemporary poet and mystic Shalene Harkin writes, "It's when the earth shakes and foundations crumble that our light is called to rise up. It's when everything falls away and shakes us to the core and awakens all of our hidden ghosts that we must dig deeper to find our strength. It is in times when division is fierce that we must reach out to one another for courage, hope, and deeper understanding." We are living in such a time as this, when our light as a people of faith and our integrity as a Unitarian Universalists who affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of all persons are being summoned to rise up. The UUA recently joined an interfaith lawsuit against the current administration's executive order that allows immigrant and customs enforcement officers to enter our sanctuaries during worship to apprehend undocumented immigrants. And during her post-inaugural prayer service, the Episcopal Bishop of Washington, D.C., the Right Reverend Mary Ann Edgar Buddy, expressed her concern about a normalized culture of contempt that threatens to destroy our country. And in a subsequent interview with NPR's All Things Considered, Bishop Buddy stressed the importance of being able to speak to one another with respect rather than jump to outrage. She's written a book, by the way. It's called How to Learn to Be Brave, How We Learn to Be Brave. In her book, she calls upon a coalition of the faithful to serve as instruments of peace, who speak the truth with love and strive to bend the arc of the moral universe toward justice for the most vulnerable among us. In response to these current events, and in solidarity with Bishop Buddy, the social justice team and several members of this congregation have decided to offer Impact Boston's de-escalation training to our local interfaith community. Impact's effective communication workshops teach participants how to remain calm when addressing difficult issues with strangers, friends, or family, and how to respond effectively to common forms of defensive behavior. This nonpartisan workshop is an invaluable opportunity to learn how to have civil discourse with people whose views may differ from our own. And so if you feel so called, I invite you to join us for this 5-hour workshop on Saturday, March 29th, from 9:30 a.m. to 3 p.m., and we will provide lunch. May it be so.